Hey guys, welcome back. This is a video from Hillsdale College with Vivek Ramaswamy, talking about it's his lecture on woke capitalism against America, and I believe this is focusing on ESG, which is the environmental, social, and governance credit score that is applied to corporations and probably one day on us. All right, let's get into this.
My parents immigrated from India 40 years ago to Southwest Ohio, where I was born. They weren't rich. I asked my dad why he chose to come to Ohio, and he said it's because his older sister, who also came from India, lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Now, that of course begged the question of why my aunt had left India all the way to come to Fort Wayne. And we joke around that because it's the only state where the word India is actually contained in the name of the state, Indiana. So that's the story we tell anyway. My dad was a company man himself. He was in at GE's Evendale, Ohio plant. He worked there loyally for over 40 years. And my mom was a geriatric psychiatrist who spent most of her career treating patients with Alzheimer's disease in nursing homes in the Ohio area. If I learned one thing during my own upbringing, it was that being the odd man out in a crowd isn't always a bad thing. I went to a pretty rough public school through 8th grade, where it wasn't particularly abnormal for a kid to show up to school with a knife. My parents then switched me to a private Jesuit high school, something that actually shaped my own views, even though I'm a Hindu. And when I went on to college and I graduated from Harvard in 2007 in biology, I ended up becoming a biotech investor rather than an academic scientist. I went to law school along the way. I went to Yale. I had an itch to study law and political philosophy, but I decided to keep my job at the fund where I worked. And after I finished law school in 2013, I had a new itch. I had an itch to build something rather than just be a passive investor in biotech. So I left my job to start a biotech company. I started by developing a drug for Alzheimer's disease, a passion that I'd actually picked up from my mother. But ultimately, that drug failed. It was the first drug we developed. That failure hurt, and it chastened me. But it also taught me that hardship isn't the same thing as victimhood. And eventually, the company thankfully went on to develop important medicines for other diseases that helped a lot of patients in the end, one of which was a drug for prostate cancer. I led the company for 7 years until I stepped down as CEO this January, because I felt even more compelled to help treat a different kind of cancer. It's one that affects the heart of our country. It's not a biological cancer. It's a cultural one. And given the reality of the world that we live in, I wasn't really free to speak about it as the CEO of a high-profile company. So I had to step down so that I could talk about it not as a CEO, but as a citizen. That new disease, that new infection, is spreading across our country like wildfire. It is one that even the best of science is not going to cure. And that new disease is called woke culture. It's the new secular religion in America. And its belief system centers on the idea that your identity is based on your race, your gender, and your sexual orientation, full stop. It posits that America is a systemically racist country, and that if you're black, you're inherently disadvantaged, and that if you're white, you're inherently privileged, no matter how much money you have, no matter what your upbringing was. Your race and gender govern who you are and what thoughts you're allowed to have. That's it. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley summed it up pretty neatly last year, actually, when she unapologetically declared, "We don't need any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice," end quote. I'm going to guess that I don't fit her description of what counts as a brown voice. Here's the clever part about how this particular virus spreads. If you disagree with any of those claims, then that actually means you're just racist and you don't know it. And the more you resist a woke claim, the more that's seen to validate it. If you say, "I'm not racist," that means you are racist. If you say all lives matter, that somehow means that you believe that black lives don't matter. If you capitalize the W in white or fail to capitalize the B in black, you're racist. And there is no greater damnation in modern America than to be labeled a racist. So between pledging fealty to this new religion and being tarred with the scarlet
Absolutely
R,
a religion.
everyday Americans are choosing to bend the knee. The consequences may be existential for America. This has created a new culture of fear in our country. Fear of losing your job, fear of failing a class at school, fear of becoming a pariah in your own community. And almost every day, somebody new is sacrificed at the altar and excommunicated from civil society for saying the wrong thing. This new culture of fear has completely eroded our culture of free speech in America. A good measure of the health of any democracy, especially American democracy, is the percentage of people who actually feel free to say what they actually think in public. And right now, I am sorry to say that we are doing abysmally on that metric. According to a recent survey conducted by the Cato Institute, over 60% of Americans, an overwhelming majority of this country, says they are afraid of saying what they believe because of the current political climate. That is not America. It is not the country that my parents came halfway across the world to join. It is not the country I learned to pledge allegiance to as a kid. We have a new red guard in our country that's reminiscent of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, except instead of adhering to Marxism, the new guiding principle for today's red guard is this new form of wokeism. So that's where we are today. In the name of diversity, we've sacrificed true diversity of thought. In the name of democracy, we've sacrificed our most...
This guy is absolutely on point, though, about the relationship between what we're seeing in wokeism and what the Chinese communist revolution, or the Chinese Cultural Revolution, what they went through in, was it the 60s?
Isn't it all thought that they're trying to control, at any rate, the communists? I mean, it was always thought control that they were trying to get you to conform, to think of to only behave, speak, and think, if possible, only what was acceptable to the government. And this is the same thing as they're using other thoughts, but it's the same direction they're putting you into, trying to herd us into as a society, is to only conform to what the government says is acceptable. And the government, via even using corporations and such, leveraging corporations. And it's interesting because our government that is pushing wokeism, they go after racism, they prosecute racism. But I'm going to tell you something: in the Bureau of Prisons in the United States, racism is open because they allow everybody to segregate by race.
Right.
And it's open that happens. They have television rooms that are all for only blacks. They'll have them for only Hispanics. They'll have them for only whites. They'll have them whatever. And nobody says anything, but they allow it to happen. But if you try to do that in a corporation, within a private corporation, within the United States, is the government to be all over you? There'd be a lawsuit against you.
Right. Well, the government found it an extremely clever way, with the help of social media, to use corporations to bypass the amendments.
Right. Exactly right. Because they act like the federal government's is going to impose employment standards on corporations through HR or whatever, through lawsuits, and back them up if a company steps out of the wokeism, if you will, lines that are
they do
set
it even
forth.
better now, and I think Vivek gets into this. So the ESG is how you can directly get capital loans. And
if you can get idiots who use that to invest, and there are plenty of idiots. I mean, I still see them wearing masks walking around town. I just saw them today walking around.
Right. Well, the companies have to apply for the loans to get any credit that you need to operate a business that's of any kind of scale, and to even get on the stock market, and to get major investors to back your company. If your company is of any kind of value, big companies, big S&P, where that company lives, then your ESG score will directly reflect whether or not you, as the CEO of the company, is going to keep your job longer than 6 months.
Yeah, well, they use that to not have banks not fund firearms companies.
Yep, that's exactly why you don't see firearm companies on the big exchanges.
And that's where you need to see private money kick in. Okay, fine, let them go to the big exchanges with their woke garbage, and private money come in. Trump money, others who have a lot of money. to go ahead and give private investing. The Mormons do a lot of that, and in their religion, they do a lot of private even a lot of the Jews, if you will, do a lot of private funding of businesses within their group of people because they are like-minded.
Yep.
And that's not a racist statement; that's a factual statement.
Yeah,
And
that's
and
where like
it's
small businesses can do that, right? And even medium-sized businesses can do it pretty well. It's when you get to the point where you go public. That's where the problem roots. All the problems that we dealt with, were always from publicly traded companies. The
I
ones
had
that are
this
lower level, you didn't run into that as much. Even with the government mandates, the companies were a lot softer in how they dealt with their employees that didn't want to deal with the mandates.
Yeah. Well, now they're starting to recall the mandates.
Oh, they're
because,
long gone. I don't think there's any company that has a mandate left. Even the medical don't even have mandates, but for whatever reason, the medical offices still require nonsense. I don't know why.
Conformity.
It was the weirdest conformity too, because the government, the CDC, came out against now masking in public at all.
I saw a number of people with 2 masks on today in the grocery store.
I know.
It's like,
I know.
Are you kidding me?
I saw
really?
a guy driving his little Toyota with a mask on, alone in the vehicle.
Still today.
Mm-hmm.
And China's having problems, as we've discussed, with their mandates, is shut down their entire country, actually, in a lot of ways. Is we have got to. We had an interesting little side note. Is I was in Connecticut for like 9 years. I lived down there and had 2 Scottish Terriers. One I'd gotten as a puppy. Another one I had inherited from an author, actually a fairly famous author's mother. I take them for a walk on the leash, and Scotties are terriers, so they're stubborn. And the one that I had raised was fine, but once the other one would get so far away from the house, would just lay down, wouldn't walk. I thought, well, I get that. I'm a shepherd guy. I raise shepherds and such, so I'd tug on the leash. That dog would let you drag it home before it would get up and walk. So what would end up happening every time I took it out for a walk, if I got to a point that dog decided was too far, it would do nothing. I would have to pick it up and carry it because I couldn't drag it home, but it would have let me drag it home, and I would end up picking it up because, believe me, I gave it every shot I had as a Marine. I'd like, get up, and it wasn't getting up. So I'd have to pick it up and carry that dog home. And the American people need to just lay down. Just lay down and say, hey, you know what? Not an inch further. We're not moving. You're going to have to change your approach. You're going to have to change some of the things that you were trying to cram down our throats because we're just not going to participate in it. That dog didn't want to participate in that walk, so it refused to participate and didn't bite me, didn't growl, just stopped. And the American people need to say, hey, you know what? You guys are going too far. With ESGs and all the nonsense going on, they just need to stop. And because we're going to collapse as a society because we're not going to be able to compete economically or in any other way if we don't. We're going to fold.
Let's get back into this.
Important democratic norms of free speech and open debate.
I want to correct him on something. We're not a democracy. We are a republic. Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution guarantees to several states a Republican form of government, not the party Republican, but the style of government. And this democracy.
I guarantee you he knows that. But there is something, I don't know if it is just like not indoctrination, but it's like if somebody just keeps repeating something and everybody's like, oh yeah, we're a democracy. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why people keep referring to us as a democracy. It blows my mind. They know, though, if you ask them, like, we're not a democracy, right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, our founders were frightened of us becoming a democracy.
Right.
And that's mob rule. That's why we have a House and we have a Senate, even though they changed the way we elect our senators and the 17th Amendment. but which leaned us more towards a democracy. But we're not
Yes.
a democracy; we're a republic,
Yep.
and we slipped completely into a democracy. Is really what they would like.
Oh, right, right. Well, as we've discussed before, a slip into democracy is one generation from fascism.
Yeah. Well, I fear,
Less,
I fear.
possibly less than one generation from fascism, right? Because once you got mob rule, then that ruling mob will vote in a person that will never leave office.
Huh. Interesting. You know, I does it matter if the person leaves office or and they just change the crown or the mask, and but the people who are running that office are the same people? You look
Yeah,
at this administration as
right.
as anybody who believes Joe Biden is running everything here is out of their mind,
Yeah,
and that's
no.
what Trump ran up
It's
against. He
it's the
ran up against the people who wanted to run things, and
yeah.
he wasn't going to allow them to run things.
Well,
That's why they hated him.
it's not, people do not run the country anymore. Now parties do, right? We
Mm,
haven't probably had actual, other than you could argue Trump, definitely Trump, because obviously the Republicans didn't want him.
yeah,
So the RNC wasn't running it, but right now the DNC, you're being ran by the DNC. You don't have to say President
and all their
Biden, just say
contributors.
President DNC.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. It's it's not a person, and
Yeah,
I, uh, I personally I saw a lot of that between when Clinton left office and the Bushes took over.
right.
Uh, it was hard to tell the difference between the parties in a lot of respects,
Yeah.
if you will.
Mm-hmm. All right, here we go.
An exclusionary culture where certain views are just not welcome. So how did we get here? How did this new wokeism become so dominant in our country? The story goes back to the 1990s. A new discipline emerged in American academia. It was called critical race theory. It posited that race and other inherited characteristics created these invisible power structures that actually govern our real social relationships. In the 1890s, Karl Marx had posited that the invisible power relationships were based on economic disempowerment. But critical race theory changed that narrative. By the 1990s, critical race theory posited that the real culprit was invisible racial disempowerment. That's when wokeism was born. Now, to be clear, in the 90s, wokeism used to be about challenging the system. And there's something about that which I respect, even if I disagree with it. But today, wokeism is not about challenging the system. Wokeism is the system.
Facts.
So how did this
Facts.
fringe intellectual theory from unknown academics in the 1990s manage to infect our most important social institutions today? That is the question. And in my opinion, the answer actually begins with the 2008 financial crisis. Immediately after the 2008 crisis, you'll remember, corporations were the bad guys. The old left used to say that corporate power was bad, and the thing we needed to do was redistribute money from rich people to help poor people. Agree or not, that was their theory. But the new modern woke left in the post-2008 world had a different theory. They said that the real problem wasn't poverty, it wasn't economic injustice, rather it was racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry. And guess what? That presented a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Wall Street. They could no longer be the bad guys, but instead could actually become the good guys just by adopting these woke values. Now, remember Occupy Wall Street. That was after 2008. That was a tough pill for Wall Street to swallow. But this wokeism stuff, that was easy. Applaud diversity and inclusion, put some women on boards, create an affinity group for analysts of color. You're good to go. Just look at what Goldman Sachs did last year when its CEO declared from, of course, the mountaintops of Davos that Goldman would not take a company public in the United States unless it met Goldman Sachs' standards for board diversity, where, of course, Goldman's the sole arbiter of who counts as diverse. The banks were thrilled to dance to this new woke tune. They were happy to lend both their money and their legitimacy and their credibility to this new woke movement. But they only need one thing in return, just one ask in return. Woke left, get the new left to leave Wall Street alone. And it worked. Each side won from the trade. Big banks got to use their market power to force these woke values down our throats. And in return, the new left agrees to look the other way when it comes to leaving their market power intact. So in a nutshell, here's how it worked. Wall Street got in bed with a bunch of woke millennials. Together, they birthed woke capitalism. And of course, they put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. You don't even know what that is anymore. That's the Wall Street edition. As it turns out, there's a really similar backroom deal playing out in the other coast, in Silicon Valley as well. And here's the way it works over there. Woke activists demand that big tech censors political views that they don't like. And in return, the left agrees to leave big tech's monopoly power intact. And again, it is working masterfully for both sides. That is how this new arranged marriage works. This is not a marriage of love. This is more like mutual prostitution, and it is working. And the net result is the rise of America's newest Leviathan, the woke industrial complex. It is no longer just Wall Street. It is no longer just Silicon Valley. It is the entirety of corporate America as we know it. It's Coca-Cola training its employees on, quote unquote, how to be less white, and issuing public statements about voting laws that make it sound more like a super PAC than a soft drink manufacturer. It's United Airlines saying that it's going to apply a quota system based on race and gender to the pilots who are in the cockpit, even if that means throwing out pilot tests as a part of the process. It's Major League Baseball deciding to move this year's All-Star game out of Atlanta. It is Nike donating tens of millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter, a Marxist movement that professes to care about Black lives, while it also calls for the decimation of the nuclear family structure. While, by the way, Nike, of course, continues to market $200 sneakers to black kids in the inner city who can't afford to buy books for school. Go figure. Liberals accept it because they love woke causes. Old school Republicans look the other way because their inner conscience tells them that the free market can do no wrong, without realizing that the so-called free market that they idealize doesn't actually exist today. So both sides are ultimately blinded to the rise of this new 21st century monster that is far more insidious and far more powerful than anything we have seen in the history of our country.
So, critical race theory birthed the onslaught of the way woke culture and big banking and big tech, how they could all get along, all so happy. And I always kind of said, it's like, what happened to the liberals that were always, you remember back in the day, the Rage Against the Machine? It was to fight the big government, fight this, that, and other thing, and it's all gone. And he's dead on about the timing, that somehow that Occupy Wall Street was trying to point the fingers at Wall Street, and then all of a sudden it was quiet and it was peaceful, and then it all changed.
Yeah, well, they target the guy with Mike, whatever his name is, with My Pillow,
Yeah,
and these other, any conservative, if you will, groups, and they just want to make you out to be a hater if you don't agree with whatever it is they're selling. When in fact, what they're really selling is racism.
yeah,
And is because if you're making your judgment calls purely on race, not qualifications, then in fact it's racist.
right.
And they're masters of accusing somebody of doing what they're doing. My mom used to tell me when I was a kid, if somebody's always calling somebody a liar or continually a liar or saying something about somebody, well, check them out, because the odds are it's probably them that is doing what they're accusing the others of, and that deflection, if you will. And it's a dangerous thing we're in, is because when it's your thoughts that are outlawed, be it financial. I mean, there's a scripture verse, right? And if you don't take the mark of the beast, nobody's going to be able to buy or sell, right? So it says you won't be able to buy or sell, rich or poor. And what's the mark they're selling now, right? Wokeism.
Yeah.
And but that's just a tool.
And this is the most
for power. Sure, it is, because it's a moving target.
Right.
It's a moving target. I mean, it's like climate change, right? First it was global warming. Well, when I was a kid in high school, was we're going to have an ice age.
Yep.
Then it went to global warming, and then it went to, well, now it's just climate change.
Don't forget ozone layer when I was a kid.
Yeah, but here you have climate change. So there's no way how do you argue against climate change, because it changes every day. It was snowing yesterday. It's not snowing today here in New Hampshire. So we've had climate change. Well, I can't argue that climate change doesn't exist, but to the extremes that they're arguing that it exists, or what its outcomes are, we might have a difference of opinion. But with wokeism, oh, you're a little racist.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a little bit of a homophobe.
And he's 100% on about how now these banks, they got in bed with the Wall Street, and banks got in bed with the big corporations, and in tech too. They're all there together. And if you do not do something, now it is, and that something could be directly dox this person or ban that particular speech. It's totally legal. The
Yeah.
Constitution did not account for this. So now you're losing your freedom of speech. You're losing your Fourth Amendment. You're losing all these critical infrastructural amendments because the government's not doing it to you.
Well, the American people have been become addicts of stuff.
Right.
And the capitalists and the Democrats and the Republicans all have been guilty of selling us stuff that we don't need. But you got to have this stuff, and whatever it happens to be, the new car or whatever. I mean, it's Christmas season's coming up, so it's all the stuff you got to buy for Christmas for everybody. So they're addicted to stuff.
Right.
So what happens is then they go, oh well, now that you're addicted to stuff and you can't really live without having stuff. Is now we're going to change the rules of how you can acquire stuff or how much stuff you can acquire. If you're not woke enough, then we're not going to let you earn the money to be able to buy enough stuff. And really, what's happening is it's not dissimilar as what the South was doing with slavery back prior to the Civil War, and even through the Civil War to a point for a time. Is that with all the decisions that were made about how someone was to live were virtually by race and or economics, obviously, but economics that they controlled. And and if they control the economics, they say who's rich, who's poor, who's moderately. That's why they're complaining about inflation the way they are, because they don't want the middle class making too much money, because then the middle class can argue back and has the time and the ability to be able to fight against them when the government comes after whatever means it happens to be to take their money away from them. So now what do? They raise interest rates.
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to raise them again, they say. So who's that? Who's that control? Middle class.
Yeah.
And that's what this wokeism does. You don't hear Congress going, oh, well, the Fed shouldn't be raising interest rates, because who's that getting? How about gas prices? Well, why are the gas prices so high? Who's that hurting? Well, it hurts you and I and most people and the poor as well, who are much more than it does Joe Biden or his son.
Right.
Right. And for the Trumps, for that matter, because the wealthy, if it goes up some, that's the cost of doing business. They raise their prices accordingly.
Right.
Well, that's what's happening in America is the workers have had to raise their prices of income, of what they need to make to be able to pay the taxes that they're charged, and then the cost of goods. And then the government says, oh, now we've got inflation.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Now we've got to raise interest rates. And so what happens is then you can't speak out against it. The minute you speak out against it, so you're a hater because you don't want to fight against inflation. Well, I like a little wage inflation every now and again, personally.
And you're also a racist, bigot, homophobe for not caring about the blacks as peoples.
Right. And the very people right now, I talked to a gal and her daughter. Their daughter's got a disability and they're in Section 8 housing. They get additional money, right, for housing. I've got a whole thing with all of that, my opinion on that. But the reality is that then their rent in Section 8 housing went up $800 a month. So by January, they've got to be out because they don't have $800. They're not getting $800 more from the state or whoever they're getting their money from, right?
Right.
So now they're on the outs. And my heart goes out to them because they're caught dependent on the government. And when the government says, well, we're not going to give you any more money, and then the market, the woke market, even if you will, decides to jack prices up because, hey, look, I can get $2,000 a month rent or $2,500 a month rent instead of $1,500 what I'm getting now. And my taxes are going up. My costs are going up, but the government's lagging behind, so they're not going to give her another $800. So now she's out of place. And this is what happens when you suck on the tit of the government, and you become addicted to it. And this is what we've got to be ever so careful of, because they're going to use this woke stuff. I'll guarantee you to. It's all control. That's all it is.
Well,
that's what welfare is.
They were able to nearly, force the entire country through corporations, right? The woke idea of medicine, to vaccinate the population that did not want to get vaccinated by getting them fired. via
Yeah,
the
and they made
government.
those. Yeah, and Pfizer and the other ones, as they made themselves hundreds of billions of dollars
Yep.
in a year, 2 years time, year and a half's time, with no liability,
Right.
zero liability, and money up front by the government
Yeah.
actually, and
And on the backside by the insurance companies. So upfront by the
yeah.
government, backside on the insurance companies. Those vaccines were not free. They
Well, those tests
cost
aren't free.
right.
They're offering to mail you tests, right? You can get free tests.
Yeah.
Free? Oh, really? So the company making those tests is just making them and giving them away, right? Nobody is paying them for those tests because they're free.
No,
No one is
government.
giving them the
Government.
capital.
Your
We
government paid
are the
for it.
government.
Yeah. And the insurance. Well,
We are
right.
the government. So
And
they're
we are
taking
also
it
the
out of our
insurance companies
taxes.
because you can't even live without it. So it's of course it's the taxes, but it's also the insurance companies. But the problem is when the insurance companies are carte blanche just going for free, they're going to make that up in the premiums.
It's not free though.
No,
Yeah, but that's right, because they're charging the premiums. It's nothing is
nothing's free. Right.
And that concept that I mean, that's the same crap Bernie Sanders uses on the college kids is we're going to give you a free education. Well, eventually you're going to be working and you're going to be paying for that free education. You're going to at least pay part of it, and because you're going to find out just that free isn't free.
Right.
And
I mean, you'll end up in a country like Italy,
like
where it's 75% tax rate, and
Venezuela.
everything that's even higher tax rate there. And most of their employment's under the table because the tax rate is so high. The cost of living is so high that everything is so high that they have to do illegal work in countries like that.
Well, believe me, it's happening here. I mean,
Yeah.
why do you think the left is supporting illegal immigration?
Right.
Because they're getting paid under the table.
Right.
And what are they doing? Is the companies that are paying them under the table, they close a blind eye to, and then they go after other companies in this country if they short under declare X dollars. All those IRS agents that Biden's hiring are going to go after them. But believe me, those ones who are taking care of the undocumented workers undocumented migrants aren't going to be investigated.
Right.
And there's laws in place for companies. You have to fill out an I-9, which is a form of with 2 forms of ID to make sure everybody who works for your company is a citizen. The government comes in and checks them. You don't have them. It's $10,000 per I-9 that you don't have per employee. And they're not checking those, and they're not going to. But if they ever decide they want to check those, they'll check those on a non-woke company.
Right.